off the bat, to preface, I'm not sure if the term I'm going to be using to describe this group of people is the right sort of like PC term for it, but I'm not aware of like another appropriate term, and the only other one I know sounds even more derogatory. So if I am using the wrong name for this type of person or phenomena in humanity, correct me and I'll apologise because I just genuinely don't know. But the group I'm going to talk about is feral children, or the other term I've heard them go by, which sounds even worse, is wild children. And they're basically people of any culture or gender. Though I see from stories I've heard, it seems disproportionately female, but you know, that's just from what I've seen, who grow up mostly neglected and almost completely without contact with any humans. Some grow up, you know, genuinely outside, like living straight up in the woods, whereas some others spend, you know, their lives locked in bedrooms and basements, fed scarcely and with the barest amount of parental supervision, if that. You know, their parents don't give a fuck if they're going to treat their kid like a pet or an animal. And the way these kids are treated leads to the state, which is known as sort of fertilization, when they are very animalistic, which you can obviously see why. But with that comes the behavioural traits. You know, they don't have basic hygiene. They may turn to cleaning themselves as animals do. If they grew up surrounded by animals rather than humans, they do adopt animal traits, whereas other ones who grew up around no humans, no animals, tend to just be sort of self-neglective completely. And when introduced to society, these people are very withdrawn, very overwhelmed, and it's terrible and harrowing, but so common and so interesting, which I know sounds bad to say because it's a terrible thing, but it's interesting to study the psychology behind it, because of course it's very prevalent, much more prevalent than it should be, and the effects are astounding on these people. I also remember reading that if a person grows up in such a way and does not have a basic grasp of language by the age of around 10 to 12, they will never properly understand language. They can identify nouns, which any human at any point in their life is actually able to identify nouns based, because humans are actually a tool-consuming species, so we always recognise nouns regardless. But they will never properly understand grammar or punctuation, no matter how hard you try at that age of around 10 to 12. If they go those years without the proper academia, they will never grasp it. And that's just crazy, because that's things like that are what make it a phenomenon, rather than, you know, just inflicted mental distress, basically. Because it would be if it was only some of them, but it seems all of them, they get to a point where without this, they're at a blockade, a complete blockade that is long-lasting and will affect them their whole life. You know, it is almost irrecoverable, and they are they're subjugated to the point of subhuman, which of course they are human, but they get to a point, if it goes on long enough, that they can never recover and act like humans. They are, it's a bad term, but definitely broken. They are beyond recovery, and this has been inflicted on them. I don't think anyone chooses to do this, and there are people who choose to live out in the wilderness and out in these conditions, but these people, they tend to do it later, and they tend to do it of their own choice, which kind of shields them against the most dire consequences. But yeah, it's much more common than you would think. It happens disproportionately, and it's insane how much of an impact it has, because you think maybe a child could grow up for 12, 15 years, their entire young childhood, you know, isolated, alone, and raised by wolves, or raised by themselves solely, and maybe in therapy for a decade, maybe 2 decades, they could recover to some semblance, and slowly reintegrate into society. But when they get to a point past around 12, so to speak, they say that becomes impossible. They can't do that, which I find insane, and that is what, as I've said, makes this a phenomenon rather than sort of a syndrome. Because something happens, and of course you can tell that in a situation like this, something in your brain is going to happen, but it's not the same thing that would happen as, someone has post-traumatic stress disorder. They don't have something click in them, or, well, actually unclick in them. It's more so that they just have a part of their brain completely shift and have just a block permanently that cannot be, no therapy, no cognitive talk, no reintegration can help. They are, they become a complete different type of human, and it's terrible, it's harrowing, but it happens, and it's so astounding at the impact of it, that a child can grow up in these circumstances and basically never experience what we define as normal adulthood, culpable adulthood, because of this. It's insane. So look into it. There are some really good examples, and by good I mean as case studies, not as good as in morally good examples of feral children. And it seems that the irreversibility is more prevalent in children raised in isolation rather than children raised by animals, because I remember reading that one wolf girl who was isolated, who was neglected and left by her parents to live with a pack of wolves. About age 8 months, she was actually reintegrated into society, but I think she had some semblance of human contact occasionally. I think her name was Elizaveta, but I'm not sure. But there are so many more than you think. You think maybe this has happened, a few dozen times in modern history, but it is hundreds, if not thousands, of cases of this. It's insane. So feral children, but some people do refer to them as wild children, which I find more derogatory than feral children. Feral children, as I said, might be derogatory, but I don't know an alternative, so let me know if there is an alternative, because I want to be as, polite as possible and PC, okay?